This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 12th of January 2021 and I am 2J.
I'm JM.
And I am Miss K. Again, in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. Daily Nation, why Uhuru's backyard is restless. The Standard, high stakes in hunt for the next CJ. And The Star, Uhuru hands Raila and Musalia 2022 chance over RUTO. Let's start with the Daily Nation. Why exactly is Uhuru's backyard restless?
I think I have the answer, but we'll get to that in a moment. What the Daily Nation is telling us is that there is mounting pressure in the president's backyard to name his successor. So they talk about two different sides of the story. They talk about how there have been some MPs and government officials who are jumping ship, or others who are admitting that the RUTO wave in the mountain is turning into a whirlwind. But some others say that the president duped them into backing the handshake only so that the president could have a very calm final term. And so they say that it's necessary for the president to name his successor so that, I think they say, so they don't go into retirement and have nothing left to do with themselves. The last thing they speak to is that the president has actually decided that he will go on a tour of Mount Kenya, and that when he does so, the deputy president won't know what has hit him. Very interesting, parts that they've put together to put this story together. But I think the answer to why Mount Kenya is restless is very fair. And I think that the president going into central Kenya to tend to his garden, if you will, is much needed at this time. But I think more importantly, it made me realize that I have a bit of respect for some of the politics in the US and the UK. As much as it's quite messy, I think that there's a lot of party respect, right? If you know what I mean. Because right now there's been a lot of selfish games being played. We can see that Jubilee is completely divided down the middle or down a third or a quarter or whatever it may be. But we forget that as much as this may be entertaining, there are consequences to not having a stable party or to having conflicting groups within a party. And there needs to be a balance struck between, having a respect for the party, but having a functioning political system. And right now, the consequences of all this in-party fighting is that the government ceases to function. As a populace, we can't look at our parties and say, yes, you may be different, but within your party, what do you stand for? So I think what is it called? UDA. If UDA wants to make a name for itself, then just make a name for yourself. If RUTO wants to leave, just leave, but don't leave Jubilee to crumble as it is the majority government of the day. So we'll see. Hopefully Mount Kenya won't be restless any longer.
Well, part of the reason why they're restless is because all they care about is in the next leader, they want to find out how well that leader will take care of their interests, and their interests here really being commercial interests, protecting their money, protecting their investments, as well as creating a conducive environment even in the next administration for Kikuyus to continue to thrive in business, small businesses and large businesses. And I think somebody, a good candidate to succeed Uhuru Kenyatta, our president, would be none other than Peter Kenneth from Murang'a, my very own county. Murang'a hasn't had a chance to lead the mountain. So he would be, I think, a fairly good candidate of hustler origins and what have you. Not that that really matters, but he would be, I think, a solid candidate to succeed the president.
And that's what they speak to in the Daily Nation. That's true.
All right, we have a three-part criteria that we use to break down the headlines for you. We ask ourselves three questions. Is the headline topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And finally, is it thoughtful or just plain lazy?
I think it's accurate. I think Mount Kenya or Central Kenya is restless. It's true.
Well, it is a topical one. So I think we put it in the parking bay and we look at the next headline, The Standards, high stakes in the hunt for the next Chief Justice. So this article gives us a rundown of what's going to happen as we go into the search for our next Chief Justice. And they say that the next CJ will most likely swear in the 5th president next year and will therefore play a decisive role in adjudicating election disputes, should there be any. So they then give us a history of the particular Chief Justices that we've had under the 2010 Constitution, and they say that there have been 3 CJs under the 2010 Constitution, the late Ivan Gesheru, Willy Mutunga and Maraga. And they say that if the chances, the trend is anything to go by, then there's a likelihood that the next Chief Justice will be an outsider, because they do believe that Ivan Gesheru rose up through the ranks in the judiciary, as did Chief Justice Maraga, who has just departed, whereas Willie Mutunga was an outsider and he was in between them. So you have an outsider, an insider, outsider, so most likely to have another outsider. I don't know. They also say that the 2/3 gender rule allows that a successor to be male or female, so they do not lock anyone out, but they do notice that there are 2 women currently in the Supreme Court, and they say that is the acting CJ Philomena Mwilu and Justice Njoki Ndungu. But they say that Mwilu has problems currently, as we know, and Njoki is both Kikuyu and young, so she has a chance to run in the future. They also state other people who could want. They bring out the tribe question, that they say that Supreme Court has persons from the Kamba community, Mwilu, the Luya community, Wanjala, the Kikuyu community, Njoki, Samburu, Lenaola, and Somali, Ibrahim, which makes the chances of any persons from these communities clinching that spot rather slim. This excludes the AG, who they say could be a contender, and also the former AG. And Professor Makau Matua is an outsider and may be given a seat at the at the table, as they say. I say that this is a question that we will discuss, and the Judicial Service Commission Deputy Chair Mercy Ndeche said that the Commission will convene this week and put out a 14-day notice for the vacancy. We'll discuss this.
I think one of the critical things we need to address as we look for a new CJ is to actively interrogate their political persuasion. Justice Evans Gesheru was a conservative, deeply conservative in his jurisprudence. This Willie Mutunga, liberal, and then you have a non-native species in the name of Chief Justice Maraga, who was not even ideologically aligned. If you know, I don't even think he knows what the word ideology means. Really, in terms of
rules.
a political persuasion. And that, I think, is what led him to make so many errors, because you have to have a theory, even as you
of justice,
a theory of justice. Exactly. Even as you make decisions, as you arbitrate. So he didn't have that, and I think our next one, we need to really think through.
Exactly, and I think that's what,
grounding.
If Maraga should be anything to us, it should be a lesson learned.
Yes.
You really need to apply yourself to not just the Chief Justice, but any role that you give to anybody in this country. If he's going to be the highest arbiter in the land, you can't just give it to, anybody. As you said, a non-native species.
Absolutely.
You need stable ideological mind.
Exactly. You've got to be tethered around a certain political ideology.
And there's nothing wrong with being partisan when you make those decisions, because as long as you're in power at that time, you do what's the best in your own best interests.
Absolutely.
Finally, the star.
Okay.
Hands Raila and Musalia 2022 chance.
Yes. So the Star tells us that in light of President Uhuru Kenyatta's remarks over the weekend, where he talked about an end to Kikuyu Kalenjin domination, that has now bolstered the candidacy of the NASA principals, and in particular for the role of President Raila Odinga, Musalia Mudavadi, and perhaps their deputies, the lesser two, Kalonzo Musyoka, Moses Wetangula. So all these guys are now basking in the glory of Uhuru's surprise remarks. Raila Odinga also, spoke at length yesterday of Uhuru's remarks over the weekend, saying that it's time for some sort of rotation ethnically, and he believes that we can arrive at an agreement. I don't see why we're so shy, or rather, I don't see why we should be so shy about talking about our ethnicity. And I'll give an example here of Malaysia, a country which is very pragmatic about its ethnic reality. Now, Malaysia is the only country in the world that has a system of elected monarchy. You've got the head of state who is ceremonial, and then you've got a head of government who is executive. And every 5 years, the ceremonial head of state is elected amongst the monarchs, and the monarchs here are the leaders of the different ethnic groups, and that seat rotates around every ethnic leader for 5 years. So that's, for example, a system that's very pragmatic about ethnicity.
You just described BBI.
Yeah, exactly. And so these haters of BBI and people who are saying BBI is taking us backward, they really need to think twice and read widely about solutions that could work for us.
Very true.
I do agree in taking a solution that is cognizant of our reality. And our reality as Kenyans is that we are ethnic people deep down. What do we say about the headline? The Star, the Standard, the Daily Nation. I'm partial to the Standard.
I would toss the Star for just generally being wordy, as always.
Yes.
Then between the Daily Nation and the Standard. Yeah, I think I like the Standard quite a lot as well.
Then that gives us the Standard as our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. And just like the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to break down the cartoons for you. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And finally, is it effective or just plain lazy? Daily Nation.
In the Daily Nation, we have a cartoon. I'm not sure who it's by. Ndula, of course. And so here we have former CJ, David Maraga, and he is chasing and handing a baton over to current or acting CJ, Philomena Mwilu. And he's screaming and he says no to impunity as he hands over a megaphone. I can't tell if Mwilu is running away from him or ready to receive his message. And I think the caption there is in reference to his farewell speech where he said, without the rule of law, nobody will be safe in this country. Say no to impunity and maintain the rule of law. I think the problem with this guy is he was just too much of a stickler for rules. You know, I think the beauty of the law is that it's a combination of flexibility and rigidity, and you have to find a balance between the two. Otherwise, you know, what are you doing? So I really hope Mwilu doesn't take his advice.
I think I chuckled at it, so we'll keep it in the parking bay as we look at the Standard, where we have a war. Is it a war? Fight. World BBI bout, the umpteenth round. On one side of the ring, you have a caricature of President Uhuru Kenyatta, and in his hands are a glove and a glove that is a caricature of Raila Odinga. He's both a mouthpiece and a boxing glove. On the other side of the ring, we have a caricature of William Ruto ready to fight it out. I can't say I don't understand it quite, and maybe that's my fault.
It's an underwhelming cartoon. It's making an obvious, conversation. I don't know. The conversation is obvious, no?
Yes, it is obvious.
It is. But and also there's a misrepresentation here. They've drawn Ruto as the same size as Uhuru. That is totally inaccurate. Unless Ruto commissioned this cartoon, he has no idea what is up against this William Ruto.
Very true.
He really must have no idea going up against the system, going up against a political establishment that came to power before he was born. My goodness.
So I think
he should be a miniature. He should be a miniature size fella here.
On that note, we toss it. Standard.
Finally, Star.
Yes. So in the Star, we have a cartoon of the departing Chief Justice Maraga, and beside him is a pair of shoes, really larger than him, that he seems to have walked out from. And then beside him, you've got a really huge shoe in comparison, and this is the shoe of the executive there. And he says, "Few have stood against tyranny and spoken truth to power," suggesting perhaps that there's big shoes to fill, suggesting that he was unable to fill the CJ's shoes as well, because as you can see, his feet in comparison to those shoes,
they're quite small.
Well, maybe Ozone is reminding him that he's now just a mere civilian.
That also is a reminder.
Commoner.
Exactly, a commoner.
What do you think of the 3 cartoons? Now that we tossed one between the Star and the Nation, I'm partial to the Nation.
Yes, I think I prefer the Daily Nation as well. Yes, are we in agreement?
We're in agreement, and we have our winning cartoon from the Daily Nation. And now our final thought. But before we get there, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And now our final thought. This week we are looking at a book entitled We Need New Stories, Challenging the Toxic Myths Behind Our Age of Discontent by Nazreen Malik. So she writes very well and very eloquently about the world that we live in, applying her mind to some of the most important dates of our age. And we live in this very confusing and chaotic time. I think the 21st century is very interesting, if we can say that. An age in which many values are taken for granted, they're being questioned, and where universal rights are casually being denied. And so this book attempts to make sense of where we are and what we will lose if we don't wake up. And she does this by examining 6 myths that have contributed to this discontent that we're experiencing. So yesterday we looked at the myth of political correctness, and today we look at the myth of the reliable narrator. So in literature, a reliable narrator is one who is accurate and impartial, or should be rather. And this is contrasted with the unreliable narrator who lacks objectivity, may conceal or design or hide significant information from the reader. And so according to Malik, the norm of the reliable reader is that plagiarism or falsification have become these red lines, the things that you should not do. But gullibility and lapses in moral judgment are par for the course, which just means that they've become standard, they've become typical and expected. And we're saying that those things are being gullible and having lapses in moral judgment. And so all she says that this means is that accountability has become absent. And so instead what we observe is this maintenance of the status quo. If a narrator appears to not fit the cultural norm of a society, he or she is then labeled as unreliable. And why? It's because we have been conditioned to believe that what we are told is the truth, and that we should trust all that information and where it comes from, and that anybody who goes against the grain should be vilified until proven otherwise. And I think yesterday GK was giving the example of the tyranny of numbers. Professor Mutahi Nguni was vilified until it was proven that his point of view, while not the status quo, was indeed the truth. And so she uses the Iraq War as a helpful illustration of the myth of the reliable narrator. So after realizing that the need for war had been fraudulently manufactured with the help of the media, those same media outlets began to issue what are called mea culpas, which is Latin for an acknowledgement of having done wrong or an admission of having made a mistake that should have been avoided. And so the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Republic, and other large media outlets began admitting that they actually played into the agenda of the powerful, that they helped, stir up the country's desire for war. And they actually ignored the other side who were giving contradicting views, saying that there is no need to go to war. And so you see that there was a failure of the media to separate themselves from the powerful, the people who, paid for their bills. But then there was no consequence for the powerful who pushed for the war, and then the media who peddled that agenda. And so she says in the book that, and it goes back to the title, why we need new stories. But apart from needing new stories, we need new storytellers. Who are those people who are going to tell the stories for us in a new, different, and impartial way? And so I guess the last thing I can say is that the point of the reliable narrator is to help the plot of a story move along. But the point of an unreliable narrator sometimes is to ask the reader to see that something isn't right. And I think when you read a book and you can tell the narrator is lying to you, it opens your eyes to falsehoods. And so I think as Kenyans, I think sometimes we need to stop going along with the status quo, read between the lines, and not take for granted that everything is given to us. Read a little, question a little bit more, and I think it's important. Yeah.
And I agree with you. And sometimes one of our biggest storytellers are the media themselves, our own media, Standard, Star, Nation. And there are times when our press has gotten it very wrong. There are times when international press has gotten it very wrong, and they have admitted it. The 2016 presidential election in America, everyone thought that Donald Trump was going to win. Our own media thought that Donald Trump was going to lose. And do you know what happened? They put out a headline with a big picture of Hillary Clinton claiming victory, yet the results were absolutely different. The Brexit campaign, everyone thought that Britain would stay. They ended up leaving. No one knew what was going on. And the author of the book says, and I quote, "As a columnist, it felt surreal to start writing explainers for what happened when I had not written a single piece expecting it to. It was the media version of working at a bank on the day the market crashed and the stock price went to zero." Has this scenario played out in Kenya? I think so.
Yeah.
The 2013 presidential election. And I will quote ourselves, we were the alternative voice with the tyranny of numbers. And according to 3 opinion polls commissioned by the Nation Media Group, a runoff between Raila and President Uhuru was inevitable. The polls showed that Raila would win during the second round of voting, largely benefiting from Musalia Mudavadi's supporters. But we all know what happened in that election. There was no runoff, and in fact, there was a solid victory for Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yeah.
Ipsos Innovate, Strategic PR, Infotrack Harris, and Consumer Insight all did polls to the contrary. But only Ipsos Synovate chose to publicly revisit the final survey results. So let's look at what the book says about what the media did. In those times when they went wrong, 2016 American presidential election and the Brexit campaign, they chose the denial route. There was no wholesale appraisal of how they failed to do that one job that they were tasked to do, to report and explain the facts, as opposed to echoing back industry and political class conventional wisdom. The myth, the fact that they did not see it coming, that there needed to be serious introspection, was not a factor. In fact, they said because they did not see it coming, no one could possibly have seen it coming. There was a wholesale failure on the part of the media organizations, journalists and pundits to separate themselves from the agenda of power.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this. Myths do need narrators. Stories do need storytellers. They cannot be replaced, and new stories cannot be written if the bench of voices we continue to appoint and we continue to vest with authority is not questioned at the least. And we have to ask ourselves these questions in Kenya. Who dominates storytelling in Kenya? Which cohort does the job of myth narration, and are they representative? Why do I say this? Representation, as says the author of the book, is the first solution to the monopoly of ignorance. For myth projection to end, for the necessary change to happen, schemes to foster and integrate those from different backgrounds are vital. I'll end my thoughts there.
Yeah.
Interesting. So reliable narrators in this context are those who fall into the cognitive traps. And the author gives an example of periods in recent history when journalists who were supposed to report and explain the facts ended up misleading audiences. Ms. K, you've talked about Brexit, one such instance, the US presidential election. Then there's also the Iraq War. And here what the journalists did in the US is they took on the claims of the Bush administration wholesale and failed to critique a lot of the claims that were being made by the administration. And they fell into, what journalists end up doing is falling into certain biases. And I'll draw a little bit here from Robert Greene in his book, The Laws of Human Nature. And he lists 5 biases which you ought to be aware of. And so perhaps if you've got a pen and paper, note this down so that the next time you're tuning in to listen to the News Gang, the next time you're tuning in to listen to Tanga Tanga, the next time you're tuning in to read an article of The Elephant, watch out for these biases. There are 5. Number 1, confirmation bias. And that's when you hold an idea, a certain point of view of an issue of the world, and you convince yourself that you arrived at that conclusion or that idea rationally, and then you go out there and look for evidence to support that view. So that's number 1. Number 2, conviction bias. And this is when you hold on to an idea that is secretly pleasing to you, and so you go out an extra mile to convince yourself to believe in it firmly, and then you loudly contradict anyone who challenges that point of view. So that's when you're deeply rooted in a particular conviction, and you've closed your mind completely to listening to alternative viewpoints. Appearance bias, number 3. We see people not as they are, but as they appear to us. And so here what Robert Greene is saying, appearances are sometimes misleading. And there are many people that you listen to, even in mainstream media, you know, people you listen to at 9 p.m., some gentlemen and ladies, you think they're so well put together, they're proper, you think that they've got really good brains, but actually they've been given envelopes. They're doing envelope journalism. Somebody has collected a bit of money and they're pushing a certain narrative, and they're hiding behind that appearance of properness to mislead you in a certain direction.
Yes.
So you've got to put your antennas out to just figure that one out. And then the fourth is the group bias. A lot of these journalists as well, particularly those on Newsgang, I imagine, they find that they have to conform with each other, they have to conform with the tribe. People oftentimes don't like to contradict what their colleagues are saying, and so sometimes there's a lot of groupthink going on. So be on the lookout for that. And finally, the blame bias. It's often painful to look at our mistakes critically and objectively. Our introspection is limited when we make errors, and our natural response is always to blame others, to blame circumstances, and that's why a lot of these journalists will end up making mistake after mistake after mistake, because they're not learning any lessons, and they've chosen to blame others. So be on the lookout for those 5 biases, even for yourself, but also for the journalists that you listen to, these reliable narrators, so to speak. Yeah.
If you've gotten anything from this episode, it's to question the narrator that he gives you your story.
Yeah.
But also I'd like to end with a quote from Chimamanda. Before I do that, don't forget again to subscribe to our YouTube channel, but you can find us on your TV screens. We're on Pan, Free to Air, Star TV, and Go TV and Star Times. Star TV and Go Times. You know what I meant. We had a winning cartoon from The Standard, Daily Nation. What is this today? Is it opposite day? We had a winning cartoon from the Daily Nation, a winning headline from The Standard, and I will leave you with a quote borrowed from Chimamanda Adichie from her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Have multiple stories and multiple stories. Have a good one.